Hi folks, welcome back. In this week's video we'll be taking a look at some tools that are made in South Africa, and they are Lasher tools. So the two tools that I've got my hands on to have a look at this week is the Machete, and I also picked up a small hatchet. So Lasher Tools started out in South Africa in 1929, somewhere around that time, and they started out as the African Shovel Company, and they were making shovels ostensibly for the mining industry, which was obviously a big industry in South Africa and still is to this day. At that time, obviously, a lot more work was done by hand, and so shovels, picks, etc. were very useful. Now, when they first started out, my understanding is that they sourced a lot of their steel from Sheffield in England. So the steel came from Sheffield, and they also got their ash for their handles from England as well. Well, then during the Second World War, when material shortages really kicked in, they started looking for materials close to home. So they had their own produced iron and steel from that point on, and they also sourced their own handle material. Now, I don't know what the material was. It wouldn't have been ash, I don't think. Well, in 1971, I think, somewhere around there, they changed their name from the African Shovel Company to Lasher Tools, and that's the brand that they still have now. The information that I have is that Lasher came from Scottish labourers who worked on the mines. They used to move the lashings, which was the sort of tailings that came out of the mining industry, and the men who worked in that process were called lashers. Now, one of the sources of information said that Lasher actually at one stage were making the machetes for cold steel. Now, I don't know if that's true. If anyone can verify that, that would be interesting. Now, they make this one, which is just a standard machete, and they also have one that's more of a cookery shape. So this one is called 302 Machete Polyhandle. Their website doesn't specify, but other sources of information have said that this is either 1050 or 1095 carbon steel is what they use for these machetes. And also I think the polyhandle is actually made from recycled materials. This is all made in South Africa. Now, these are actually very cheap over here. This was the equivalent of about £5, which, you know, maybe $6-7, something like that. So it's pretty cheap. Now, they're not made to be aesthetically, you know, appealing or anything like that. They're purely tools. So these are tools that people pick up cheaply and are going to use hard. But I think it looks like a pretty functional tool. It's not sharp. It doesn't come very well sharpened. It has got a bevel on it, but it will need to get it up to razor sharpness. It would need a bit of work. However, I think for a lot of the purpose that this is designed for, brush clearing, it probably would work quite well just as it is. So the other item that I picked up, the dealer didn't have all the options that Lasher offer, but he did have some hatchets, and he had also the longer axes. Now, I believe these hatchets are also supplied with a wooden handle, but this particular one they only had in stock, and the dealer was with a poly handle. Once again, I believe they recycled plastic for these poly handles, and then it's a 900-gram head. I think it's fair to say that in South Africa, for any of the sort of bushcraft, camping, outdoor sort of activities, most people would be normally using, you know, a hunting knife or a machete or something of that ilk. Most use that these sort of hatchets are put to would be for preparing kindling for the barbecue. So I think for firewood prep, which is what this axe is designed for, then, you know, no problem. All the rounds you would buy typically come in a pre-cut size, perfect for barbecues, and people just split them up to the size they want. Now, you could replace this handle probably on a slightly longer one with this 900-gram head, you know, sharpen it up, and I think it would be a very useful and usable axe. Now, this one I think was the equivalent of about £15. Maybe what's that, $17-18, something like that. So, you know, I think it's, from what I can tell, it's pretty nice steel. It's a good utility shape, and that's really cheap, made in in South Africa. Now there was one piece that was particularly gnarly, and it was probably a piece of acacia or something like that. It was quite knotty, quite hard, so I resorted to a larger axe, and this is one I dug out of my dad's garage. And it's the type of axe that you don't buy a small hatchet. This is the other type that are generally for sale, and they are, I guess, based on American felling axe patterns. And this would be your larger utility axe that most people would have if they went for something bigger. So I'm not sure the make or origin, but it's quite old. Now I guess the weight of this head's probably 2 to 2.5 kilograms, possibly. It's quite heavy. Profile, but it's weighty enough to do sort of splitting on larger rounds, but it's not designed as a pure splitter. It is generally a utility axe. Now it has got a maker's mark. I don't know what it is. So people like Ben, maybe Kurt, if you guys know, if you watch this video, if you actually know, it looks like an R and a W. Would definitely be interested in knowing where that came from. It's been pressed in during the forging process, so it does look like quite a nice, well-made axe. So I'd definitely be interested if anyone has any information on this, but not sure how old it is. Probably fairly old. Now here's an interesting piece that I found in my dad's garage. It's actually a cane knife made by Alico in Spain, and during the 60s they were making and selling vast amounts of these cane knives that went to South America and Africa. They were exporting them there for the cane industry. That stage, I'm not sure what it is like now, but certainly the cane farmers there, actually it was all done by hand. The harvesting, they'd burn the leaves off, and then it was all harvested by hand using these curved cane knives. These days it might be more mechanized, I'm not sure. Quite an interesting bit of history and a bit of a comparison to the Machete. So you can see the curve on the blade. The length's actually very similar, much broader blade. So this curve obviously was quite nice. I mean, this would be a right-handed version, quite nice to get low to the ground. Another bit of information that I gleaned from my dad was these were actually used during his time on the farm to prune wattle. So they had some small stands of commercial wattle. They used to use the bark for tanning, and they'd also use the felled timber for mining props. I guess on farms you often just use a tool for a number of purposes. You wouldn't just buy a whole lot more. So these were available, and they would use these for bush clearing, but also for pruning these wattles. And then later, once they'd felled them, they'd actually limb with these as well. So a good utility tool. And as I said, you can see that the axe culture in South Africa wasn't that big. You'd often use things like machetes, brush cutters, whatever, would be put to a multitude of purposes, because you wouldn't normally consider that this would be a pruning tool. But you use what you have at hand, and it's amazing what you can get to work. Anyway folks, I hope there was a bit of an interesting diversion into some of the South African tools that are available to would-be bushcrafters, etc. But it was definitely fun for me to explore brands that I remember from long ago, and they're obviously very useful utilitarian tools. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.